Welcome back to another episode of OPH Outdoors. And today I'm going to be doing something I do each year, and I do this because my rod arsenal changes all the time. So every year I've got a lot of new rods, a lot of new reels, and I just change stuff up, what I'm using. So I figured it's a good thing to do each year so people can see the rods I'm going to be using throughout the year, the reels I'm going to be using, the gear ratios, the actions, lengths, all of that stuff, the line I'm using for each bait, and what rod and stuff I'm using for each bait. So in this video, I'm going to go over my 2020 rod and reel arsenal. I'm just going to be talking about the rod I'm using, the specs of the rod, the specs of the reel, the line, and then what baits I'm going to be throwing. I'm not going to be going too far into depth with it, so I don't get into a super long video. So yeah, if you guys have any questions with any of these specific rods and reels, feel free to drop a comment below, and I can do a video specifically on any technique or any rod and reel that I have, so you guys can see that. So with that being said, let's get into my rods and reels. So the way I'm going to be doing this is I'm going to be starting off with my spinning reels, and I'm going to be going to my casting after that. I'm going to start off with my cheaper rods and reels. In the spinning, go to my highest end rods and reels for spinning, and then cheapest casting combos all the way up to the most expensive casting combos. So, with that being said, my first spinning rod I have is a Dobyns Sierra Series 702 SF. I've got this paired with a Shimano Sahara 2500, and this is my drop shot rod. I will only be throwing drop shots on this because I've got another rod for any other technique I need to throw. So I really don't have anything else I'm going to be throwing on this. So this is a specific drop shot rod, and that's it. Like I said, I've got a 2500 size Sierra or a 2500 size Sahara on my Sierra, and I've got 15-pound braid tied to 8-pound or 6-pound fluorocarbon leader. So yeah, there's what I'm doing. I'm going to be throwing drop shots on it, and there's the first setup. Now let's get into the second. Next up, I've got a G Loomis E6X, and this is a 822 DSR. It is 6 foot 10 inches. It's a medium light power rod, or mag medium power rod, and I use this for Ned rigs. I use this because I like a drop shot rod for it because it's got a little bit more tip, and since the Z-Man Ned rig hooks are a little bit light, that with that little bit of extra tip, you're not going to start bending out hooks on fish. So that's why I use this rod. I'm going to be using this with a Shimano Noski 2500. Same thing as the other one. I've got 15-pound braid tied to 6 or 7-pound fluorocarbon leader, and that goes straight to my Ned rig. This is only going to be thrown for Ned rigs. I always have a Ned rig tied on, so that's why I only use this for Ned rigs. So yeah, there's my second spinning combo. Next up for spinning is a Dobyns Champion XP 703 SF. This is a 7-foot rod, 3 power, so it's a medium action rod or a medium power rod, and it is a fast action. I've got this paired up with the Daiwa BG right here, and I really only have the BG on it because it was an extra reel that I had left over, and I threw it on here, and honestly I just love it on this rod. I mean, the BG is a little bit heavy, but the rod still balances really well with the BG on it, and it's still something that I can pick up and throw all day long. This rod I am specifically using any type of lighter swim bait I'm going to be using this combo for. I throw a lot of the underspins on it. If I'm not throwing that, I can also throw stuff like shaky heads, wacky rigs, Nico rigs, finesse Texas rig baits on here, just stuff like that. But I've got my last spinning rod, which also does the exact same thing that I'll talk about here in a second, and I will and some of these baits I specifically throw on that rod, or I will be throwing on that rod. So there's my second one. Like the others, this has 15-pound braid tied to 8-pound fluorocarbon, and yeah, so there is my my next setup. And now we are to my last spinning combo, and after holding the other ones, I really can tell why this is the highest end one that I have. This thing's insanely light. I just got it and I can't wait to use this. So with that being said, this is a Dobyns Champion Extreme HP 743 SF. 7 foot, 4 inch, 3 power rod, so it's a medium power rod. And I've got this paired with a Shimano Stradic CI4. This rod is, like I said, it's insanely light. just feeling it compared to the other ones. It's super light. With this, what I have tied on right now is I've got tied on a shaky head. I'm probably going to be throwing a ton of shaky heads on this rod just because how sensitive it is. It's got a little bit extra length on it compared to my 703, and this is just going to be an amazing shaky head rod. I also might throw, like with that 703, a weightless Texas rig, a finesse Texas rig, maybe a tiny jig, and that probably would be about it. I could probably throw some Nico rigs and wacky rigs and stuff like that on this. I could throw some underspins or paddle tail swim baits, but I'm probably not going to. So yeah, I mean, I've got both of these rods which can do both of those. So I've got a lot of options to throw on each one of these rods. So that is my last spinning setup I have, and now we can get into my casting setups. First up on my casting setups is a Dobyns Fury 705 CB. This is a jerkbait rod and a small square bill rod. Now, since it's a CB rod, it's a crankbait specific rod, so it is a medium heavy, moderate fast action, so it's got a little bit more tip than a normal medium heavy rod. And that's why I like it for these lighter baits like jerk baits and small square bills, because I can really get some whip on it and get those baits out farther. I've got paired with this a Lew's Tournament MB, and this is a 7.5 to 1. I probably would prefer something a little bit lower gear ratio, but it's just an extra reel I had laying around, and I threw it on there this fall for when me and Skylar were fishing our tournament, so I could have a reel on this. So yeah, I've got 12-pound fluorocarbon on here. Most of my lighter jerk baits, I'm sticking with 12-pound. I don't go down to 10-pound too much with bait casters, but it's just personal preference. You can. So yeah, I've got 12-pound fluorocarbon on this, and it's just straight fluoro all the way down. And this is a pretty good jerkbait rod so far. I like it. I can cast jerkbaits out really far, and it works really well. So there's my first casting combo, and let's move on to my next. My next casting combo is a Dobyns Fury 703C, and I've got this paired with a Shimano Curado 70. This is a spinnerbait rod and a buzzbait rod. I can also throw chatterbaits on this too. It's a little bit light for chatterbaits that I've found, and I would like to get a chatterbait specific rod, but for now I'm going to be throwing all my chatterbaits, spinnerbaits, and buzzbaits on this rod. It works really good. Since it's a 703, it's a 7-foot, 3-power rod, so it's a medium heavy, I believe. Yep, medium heavy fast action, and it works really good for those techniques. It's a little bit more nimble than what I would like, but it works, and I like this rod for the applications I use it for. Now this Curado is a 7.2 to 1 gear ratio, and that's about what I like for spinner baits. So I wouldn't change up my gear ratio too much on it, and this is the type of gear ratio I would probably use from now on for my spinner baits because it works well. So on this reel I've got 14 or 15 pound fluorocarbon. I probably could use up to 17 pounds since I'm throwing this a lot around wood, but I have 14 or 15 on it. This year I actually may change it up to like 15 to 17 pound fluorocarbon, just so if I'm throwing up in wood, I've got a thick enough line so that I can pull fish out of wood without having to worry about the line snapping. So yeah, this is my next setup, and let's move on. So this next setup is the only other rod other than my G Loomis E6X that is not a Dobyns. And this is a Megabass Levante Swingfire. The Swingfire is a crankbait rod, and it is 7 foot 2 inch, and it is, I believe, a medium power rod. This I use specifically for square bills. I love this as a square bill rod. It works really good. It's really sensitive. It's pretty light, and I've got this paired up with a Daiwa Tatula 100. I just got this reel at the Fishing Expo. I got it to put on this rod. It matches absolutely perfectly, and I cannot wait to use it. Now this is a 7 to 1 or 7:1 to 1 gear ratio, and it works really well. It's the same gear ratio that I used to have on this before I got this, the Daiwa Tatula 100, and that gear ratio I like for square bills. Now you can use low gear ratio. I've heard things saying that you can use in the 5s and 6s gear ratios. I've heard people use 7 and 8 gear ratio. If you look at Tactical Bassin, they use 7 and 8 gear ratio square bill reels. So with all of that being said, I tried originally in the 7s. It's a good middle. in between the 5/6 and then the 8s. So, and I found out I really like it. It works well, it moves the bait at a good pace, and it's just a good setup. On this reel, I just spooled this up with 12-pound fluorocarbon, and that's basically what I'm throwing for square bills. I wouldn't go lighter than 12 for square bills, especially with this, since I'm going to be throwing up in some branches, running it over some branches or logs, and I'm also going to be running it over rocks. I like 12-pound fluorocarbon, just personal preference. So yeah, there is my square bill rod, and let's keep moving. Next up is a Dobyns Sierra 733C. This is a 7-foot 3-inch 3-power rod, and I believe it's medium heavy, fast action. And this is my lipless rod, and I also use this for top waters like whopper ploppers, poppers, stick baits, just stuff like that. So I'll throw all of that type of bait on here, and I love this rod for it. I used it quite a bit this fall, and it's a great rod. I've got this paired up with a Shimano SLX, and this is a 7:2-to-1 gear ratio reel. I've got this paired up since I'm throwing it with top water too. I decided to throw monofilament on this reel. I've got 14-pound Vicious monofilament on here, and I've noticed it works really well. For lipless, I mean, you don't have to worry about them getting too deep. You don't have to worry that that line's going to float a little bit more than what fluorocarbon will. So that's why I also have mono on here. So 14-pound mono on this Shimano SLX on a Dobyns Sierra 733C, and it's a great rod for lipless and any type of topwater baits. So there we go. Let's move on. Next is another Dobyns Sierra, and this is a Sierra 766 flip. Now, with this, it is a Sierra. The Sierras have a little bit more of a parabolic curve than what the other series do. So it does have a little bit more tip for a 6-power rod than what other 6-power rods will in the Dobyns rods. I love this for flipping, pitching, any types of heavy jigs, Texas rigs. That's basically what I'm using it for. I'm 6 foot 6'1", so I can get away with a little bit of a longer rod for flipping and pitching and skipping docks and stuff like that. So that's why I'm using a 766. I got it as an all-purpose jig rod. Now that may change. I may get one more jig rod, like a 744 or something like that. But for now, this works really good. So it's a 766, so it's a 7 foot 6 inch, 6-power, and it is a heavy rod. I wasn't sure if it was any different since it's a flip, but it's a heavy it's a heavy flip fast action rod. So yeah, I'll use this for any baits up to 2 ounces, any types of jigs. Will I get that high? No, but it's rated for 2 ounce. So I'll probably just throw my 3/4 ounce jigs, stuff like that around there for deep fishing with jigs or fishing up in heavy cover. So yeah, I've got that paired with a Daiwa Tatula CT, and this is an 8-to-1 gear ratio Daiwa Tatula CT. I love this reel for throwing jigs and stuff like that, and it works really good. Originally I had 65-pound braid tied to a 20-pound fluorocarbon leader, but I broke off on braid a few times, and I ended up just tying on 20-pound fluorocarbon leader, or 20-pound fluorocarbon onto the reel, and I like it so far. It may be better sometimes to have braid than just straight fluorocarbon, but it works well for me and what I'm using it for. So for now, I'm going to keep 20-pound fluorocarbon on here and just use that for all my jig and like heavy application Texas rig style baits. And that's what's going to be on this reel. So yeah, great rod option for jigs, flipping, pitching, skipping docks, stuff like that. So I would highly recommend this rod, and I love it. So let's move on. Next up is the brand new Dobyns Kaden, and this is a 745C. This rod just came out as a trial period with Dobyns. You had to call them and order them. I think they're probably sold out of all their rods by now. They might not, but I love this rod. It's really light. I did a review video on it, or initial impression video, right when I got it, so make sure you guys go check that out if you're interested in this rod. But yeah, this is a 7 foot 4 inch rod, and it is a mag heavy because it's a 5-power. Now with this rod, I got this specifically for frog fishing, but what I end up deciding once I got it is, other than frogs, I can also throw, if I tie a leader onto it, bigger swim bait setups up to about 2 ounces. So here I've got a 1/2 ounce swim bait jig head with a Z-Man paddle tail on there. And I'm going to be throwing this a lot for deep structure fish. Fish just sitting way down in the water. I can use a heavier jig head, get it down there, and work that bait really well. I can also use this for any type of swim bait up to 2 ounce. So I might use my River to Sea S-Waver 168s on this because they're like 1 5/8 ounce. So that'll work on this rod. I will also be using this, like I said, for frog fishing. And I'll be using it for like Buka baby bull shads too. So those are what I'm going to be throwing on this. I'm also thinking about maybe heavier Carolina rigs whenever I throwing them on this. But on this rod, I've got a Daiwa Tatula CT. It is a 7:3 gear ratio, and I've got I believe this 65-pound braid, and this is tied to a 20-pound leader right here. I use FG knots on all my leaders that I tie because they work really good for me and they last and they flow through the eyelets a lot better than any of the other knots I've used. So yeah, I've got 65-pound braid tied to 20-pound leader since I'm throwing bigger, like 1/2 ounce or above baits on this other than frogs. When I'm throwing frogs, I'll cut off the leader and just go straight to the braid. So I'll just throw straight braid for frogs because I like that extra, or I like how it doesn't stretch for when you're trying to pull fish out of lily pads or cover and stuff like that. So yeah, there is my next setup. So we're getting down to my last 3 rods, and all my last 3 are Dobyns Champion XP. This is a Dobyns Champion XP 704C, and this is a light Texas rig and a light jig rod. I can also throw light Carolina on this rod and stuff of that nature. So I love this rod. I got it, I believe, at the beginning of last year, and it is an amazing rod. Super sensitive, super good rod, and it's probably one of my favorites that I have. So yeah, it's a 7-foot 4-power rod, so it's a heavy rod. And like I said, I'm throwing light Texas rigs, light jigs, light Carolina rigs. And when I say light, I mean under 3/8 to a 1/2 ounce. Most of the time I'm throwing 3/8 ounce stuff on this, and it works really good. Now, this can also be used to skip around docks and into cover because you don't want as heavy or as long of a rod when you're trying to skip. Now, you can get away with that 766, like I said before, but I use this a lot more if I'm going to be skipping or flipping into cover or in really narrow areas, just because it's a little bit shorter. I've got this paired up with a Lew's Tournament Pro G, and I believe this reel is discontinued now, but it was about $200 I believe when I got it, and it's a great reel. It's really light. This combo is insanely light. This reel is an 8:3 gear ratio, and it works really good for this application I'm using it for. On this, I believe I've got 17-pound fluorocarbon because since I'm throwing these into structure, I like a little bit heavier of a weight or of a line to it. So yeah, this works really good. I love this setup. It's probably one of my favorites out of all of my rods that I have. So yeah, there is my Texas rig and light jig rod. Next is a Dobyns Champion XP 765 CB glass. This is my mid to deep diving crankbait rod. It doesn't throw super deep divers. I use this for a lot for in between like 8-foot, 10-foot, and then up to like 18-foot divers. I can throw up to 20-foot divers if I want, but I don't have many 20-foot divers. Most of the time I'm throwing like Strike King 6XDs, 5XDs, Rapala DT10s, stuff like that. So anything in between 10 and 16-foot divers. Now, I love this rod for crankbaits. It's really sensitive. It works good. I can cast crankbaits a mile with this. I've got this paired up with a Lew's BB1. This is a really old reel, and it has held up amazing. I've had this reel, I believe, since 2016, so it's going to be on its 4th year being used. Maybe even 2015. So yeah, either 4 or 5 years old. This is a 6:4 reel. And I've got this, I believe, with either 12 or 14-pound fluorocarbon on here, and it probably needs line changed out. So when I tie on more line, I'm probably going to be throwing 14-pound fluorocarbon since I'm going to have a little bit deeper baits and baits that are going to put more drag onto the reel. So yeah, there is my crankbait rod. Lastly, I've got my biggest rod I have, and this is a Dobyns Champion XP 795 SB. It is a swim bait rod. It's a monster of a rod, and it is huge. It's 7 foot 9 inch 5 power rod. The 5 power makes it a medium heavy. Now this rod's good for anything 1 to 5 ounces. This is made for some swim baits too. I can throw swim baits up to, like I said, 5 ounces. But I've found the sweet spot of this rod is really in between 1 and 3 to 3.5 ounces. A lot of the swim baits I have don't exceed 3 ounces anyways, so I don't really care about that. But what I actually really love this rod for is, as you see tied on, is A-rigs. This is an amazing A-rig rod. I started throwing A-rigs more this year, and I absolutely love throwing A-rigs. They catch good fish, they catch numbers too. They don't just limit you to catching big fish. You can also catch small fish on it. And it's an awesome rod and reel. On this, I've got a Daiwa Alexa 300 Win, and this is a 6:3 to 1 gear ratio reel. I've got this with 65-pound braid tied to a 20-pound leader, and that's what I'm throwing for both A-rigs and swim baits. So yeah, I'll switch this back and forth between A-rigs and swim baits. Awesome rod and reel. I love this for that application. I would like to get one more so I can always have an A-rig tied on and I can always have a swim bait tied on. But if I'm going to be throwing lighter swim bait, I can always throw it on that Kaden 760 or 745 that I have. So yeah, this is my last combo that I have for the 2020 season. Now, even though I said that was my last combo for the 2020 season, doesn't mean I may not get 1 or 2 more throughout the season. Like I said, I would like to get another chatterbait rod. I would like to get another A-rig rod so I can have 2 always with me. And one other rod that I would like to get is I would like to get 1 more crankbait rod or 1 more jig rod too. So I mean, I could potentially have 4 more rods. It'll really depend on if I want to spend that money or not. I'm not sure if I do right now. So I feel like I've got a pretty well set arsenal as it begins with. I believe I've got 13 rods and reels that are always going to be in my boat. I can carry, most of the time I carry about 8 rods with me whenever I'm fishing on my kayak, so I always have plenty of options for that too. I've got plenty of versatile rods that I can bring out so I don't have to limit myself with just a few for a few specific applications. So yeah guys, I hope you guys enjoyed seeing my 2020 rod reel arsenal, and hopefully it kind of helped you out if you were wondering about some rods and reels, about what to throw on them, and stuff like that. So if you enjoyed it, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. We're going to start posting every Sunday and Wednesday. Here in a week or 2, I'm heading out to go south for a fishing trip with Skylar, and we're going to be making a big series on that. Probably a 4-part series, and that is going to come out the second Sunday of March, which I believe is the 15th. So be prepared for that. That's going to be the first series, or the first video of the series come out then. It's going to be an awesome trip. Hopefully some huge bass caught on that trip. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you in the next video.